Mine is the Azure Security FUN-damentals. So this is kind of just taking us through, for those who are kind of unfamiliar with Azure or kind of even security concepts, what we can kind of do within the Azure world. Let me kind of introduce myself and who I am. So as you can see from the slide, my name is Neil Hambly. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm a consultant kind of and architect with the Azure and data platforms for many, many years now. So I'm getting on a little bit now. Starts with a 50 kind of ish in the time zone now for my birthday. So I'm also one of those that teach a lot of different courses from Microsoft. These are the Microsoft mock courses. So that's the Microsoft official curriculum. And one of those specifically ones is the security. So not that many of us do this, but it's a 4-day AZ 500 and it's all around the security capabilities inside Azure. So I've been around for quite some time in the community. I've been doing this for probably 12, 13 years of presentations, something like 400 or so presentations for the community. And I run my own kind of Microsoft partner. So I'm a kind of training provider, a consultant, and we also do lots and lots of training. And I do like my films, whiskey, and dancing. So let's get started on what we're covering today. This is an introduction session. So we're kind of doing a 100 level beginner type material. We're going to look at the security capabilities and tooling with inside Azure, how we can create secure solutions on a very secure Azure platform. We're going to explore some of those kind of, introduction topics. We're not going to cover everything because clearly security is a vast topic and we've only got a 15-minute kind of slide time frame here. But we will share some information and the slides and show you where you can get a ton more of information as you go through and learn about Azure and specifically about security. So the way I've kind of focused this today is into 6 different lessons. We're going to kind of walk away through that, and we're going to start off with introducing you to the Azure Portal and some of the security services, and we're going to touch on some terminology or acronyms that we might use when we're discussing the security concepts. We're going to move into then what's known as security and defense. So defense in depth, where we have a number of different kind of boundary levels, and we're going to explore that and show you what that's all about and why that's important in terms of having that deployed within your kind of your mindset and also the way you approach security. We're then going to touch on a specific set of kind of service and tooling. So we've got the Azure Security Center and Azure Monitoring, and we're going to look at what we can do, how we can establish what security we have, how well that's been deployed, what's our kind of posturing for security, how we can improve that as well. Then we're going to start talking about a few of the kind of key concepts. So virtual networks, some subnets and network security groups is one of the topics I specifically picked out today, as well as firewalls, routing, and endpoints. There's a ton more that we're not going to cover purely down to the amount of time that we have. But I'm going to show you some other resources and where you can go and learn about the kind of security and Azure in general as well. So as I say, let's get started with lesson 1. So this is about the Azure Portal. This is our kind of our interface to talk to and work with provision of services. So we're going to explore that shortly. And we're going to look at some key acronyms and terminology first, and then we're going to step into the portal. So let's have a quick look at what we have in front of us. So there's quite a few kind of acronyms here, but kind of just want to make aware of a few of them and kind of just talk through very quickly. So we have things like IaaS, the infrastructure as a service, PaaS, platform as a service, and SaaS, software as a service. So essentially, we're doing lots of service-related operations inside of Azure. We have technology kind of acronyms like VNet, virtual network, NSG, network security group. So if you're not familiar with these, don't worry too much, but essentially I just kind of put this list together. But we will be kind of talking through these a little bit as we go through. So we have things like fully qualified domain name, kind of how do we know what system and service we're trying to connect to. So we need to have a kind of an address like you would for where you live. We need to be able to tell kind of the system that it's at this location. We have things like RBAC, which is role-based access control, to give us a fine level set of controls around who has access to those resources. So there's a few more on there, but we're going to kind of walk straight into what is the Azure Portal. So first off, we're going to know the URL, which is HTTPS. So it's a very secure socket kind of into that portal, and it's portal.azure.com. Now, when we go in there, depends on the rights that we're logging in with. So what identity are we using depends on what we'll be able to see once we're in there. So I'm going to jump into one of mine now. I'm just going to escape out of the presentation and jump else to where we have some slides, some screens. So first off, I'm going to go into my environment. I'm just going to get to the right one sec. Making sure I've got them all up, good, and I've got a number of screens here. So I'm just going to first log out of this environment and log back in so you can see the full kind of experience of what it is. So I'm going to go to the main kind of portal.azure URL. So we kind of get rid of that for a second and type portal.azure.com. And it's going to ask me to authenticate. So this is one of the first things we do with security is we have an identity. Now this identity is one that's in my Azure Active Directory tenant. And I'm kind of going to use a username and password. So here's my username and here's my password. And effectively that's then going to authenticate me into the Azure portal. Now there's a number of other kind of parts to that. We have Azure Active Directory we're going to look at a little bit later on. But essentially what I've got now is I've come in and I've actually directly gone to a specific, what's known as a kind of dashboard that I created that has some cool information about kind of what my security kind of concepts might be, as well as some things like quick start tutorials. Now on the left-hand pane, I'm just going to quickly explore this portal for you. I'm going to kind of show you where we can go and learn about a lot of new information, as well as where you might want to do your own guided tour later on. But kind of on the left-hand side, we have sometimes what's known as kind of the views where we can kind of see all of the kind of quick kind of access links. So this is my favorites, and I've got kind of ability to jump into these different resources. So I want to go look at my resource groups. I can just click on that link. I can see all the resource groups I have, what SQL databases might be deployed, and ones we're going to go and look at specifically in more detail today is around security. So this portal itself has the ability to not only kind of use a user interface, but we can also kind of spin up what's known as a cloud shell. And this is a command line interface, and we have a couple of options like the bash script and the PowerShell. So if you want to kind of run some of your scripting to create your resources, we have the ability to come and do that natively within inside the portal and not have to step out to another interface. So in this environment here, there's a dashboard. I'm going to want to kind of maybe go and jump in to look at one of my resource groups that I created that has some examples of the network capabilities, the security we might want to go and configure, and how we kind of work out how to do things and configure things within inside the environment. We'll come and do this a little bit later in the session today, come back and look at how I created this. In addition to that, I've got some additional kind of tabs here with the same information, but I've focused in on some of the things around the security. So what recommendations might be recommended? We're going to look at security score and the security center later on, and how we can improve maybe some of the capabilities by looking through and seeing if there's additional steps that we might want to do, and if they're quick fixes or if they're additional kind of more involved steps that actually require remediation. We have to follow instructions to get to where we need to be. Okay, so I'm going to come back and look at a few examples later on of this, but this is some of the built-in functionality inside of Azure that allows us to do the security. Okay, so that's a quick demo. We'll come back into a few of these later on. Let's go back to the slides for a second. I'm going to resume from where we were. Okay. So lesson 2 is about security and defense. Now, this is where we kind of have a number of responsibilities that ourselves and then Microsoft are going to work as a kind of team to provide the security. So let's have a quick look at kind of maybe how you're doing things outside of the Azure world, where you are responsible for all of the requirements of security. So that's securing your data centers, the physical kind of access to those data racks and those servers. You're kind of responsible for all of the operating system and network controls. So you can see on the screen here, we kind of have a drop down of all the different kind of responsibilities. And as we go through and look at these different services, maybe like the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, the requirements to what you're responsible for and what Microsoft are taking ownership of in terms of security can vary. But you're ultimately, at the end of the day, always going to have a level of responsibility. So your data governance and rights, your client endpoints and access, so who you're giving rights to allow to access those resources is always going to be in your camp. But some of the other responsibilities may be taken over by Microsoft. For example, when you do software as a service like the Office 365 and some of the other services, whereas if you're doing infrastructure as a service, you're kind of responsible for the OS and other controls inside of that VM. Defense in depth is about kind of separation between the kind of requirements of physical security. How do I get kind of control around that? So, you know, for the Azure data centers, there's a lot of kind of security around that. It's, you know, secure environments. They have, you know, very heavy restrictions on who can actually enter that building and for what purpose. And there's a very few people who actually were able to get into those data centers. Once you get in there, you're actually going to also need to kind of have an identity and access rights to be able to try and get access to those resources. So that's the next tier down. We're going to be able to kind of have to prove who we are. So maybe like a username and password, and maybe some additional kind of access through maybe a multi-factor authentication, where you're also potentially using something like your fingerprint to validate that you're who you say you are. The perimeter, where you're also going to have kind of other controls, and this is where we kind of maybe we start talking about, you know, the ability to be able to connect to those services. So if I can't get into that service and I can't, you know, connect to it through kind of maybe a virtual network, etc., then I've not got the ability to be able to try and access the resources inside that. So by controlling the perimeter, you know, cages to racks, for example, is one example, but also being able to connect to that virtual machine because my IP address, etc., is one that is on the allowed list. The network is really kind of where most people start thinking about security, but we have kind of tiers of security before that. But network is, if I can't connect to that service, I can't authenticate into maybe the Azure Active Directory. I can't also, you know, provide the right credentials and the right passwords and other security controls, then I'm not really able to connect to that network. And not connecting means I can't do anything with those resources. Computers are another option, and think about it in this way. If we have, so I'm going to, we actually have a request to turn off my camera. Okay, one sec. Let me just go back to my other entry and just turn off. Yeah, my camera is off. Okay. So the compute essentially is, let's say we have a VM and the VM is running, we'll be able to run code. But if the VM is turned off, maybe it's stopped for some reason, you know, other weekends and evenings or other kind of reasons why it's off, we need those resources. We can't run code, we can't execute on that without having the ability to access that compute. So compute, and there's a large number of VMs, there's over 200 different kind of sizes, you know, but if we're not able to connect to that compute, then effectively we can't run. It's like, you know, you come to your machine and you turn it on and, oh, the battery's dead, so I can't use my laptop. Or the power's gone and we don't have a power supply kind of backup. So we need to be able to have that compute, and that compute is very scalable in Azure, which is fantastic. It means that we can kind of turn those services on, we can scale them up and down as we need, but without compute, we are kind of stopped. The application, this is then where you are deployed applications, for example, something like maybe like SQL Server into your VM, and you're trying to run that. So the application is not configured with the right access rights, etc., and the application is not kind of in the right zone and right location, it has access to the storage and other resources it needs, then it's not going to be able to kind of connect to the kind of the final kind of tier. The bit we're trying to protect is the data. Now, data also can be protected in a number of ways. One of the key ways there is encryption, in that we can kind of make sure that even if we kind of get through all those other security layers, when we get to data, if it's encrypted and we don't have the right encryption keys, etc., we are going to be stuck there. So that's kind of the defense in depth, is that we're having some separations so that you may be able to kind of get through and get into a few of those kind of network tiers or kind of the security tiers, but you may not get to the network one, and that's kind of then a level or below that you can't get any further. Okay, so we're now going to start looking into the main kind of services available. And the ones I've chosen to focus on today is something called Azure Security Center. And we also have monitoring. So the technologies that we have inside of Azure are very much kind of dependent on the other services. So the fabric layer service that we have, and lots of other kind of storage tiers, etc. A lot of these services are interconnected in a huge way. And so when we kind of look at Azure Security Center, we don't have to do a lot of plumbing. It's already kind of done for us. We can just kind of open up that service and we can go and see what all that's about. So let's look through a couple of slides first, and then we're going to go and look at that in a bit more detail around kind of that in the portal. So first off, what is the Security Center? Well, first off, it's a kind of a security management system that's built into the Azure kind of infrastructure. It allows us to strengthen our security posture, to protect that data set, those key assets that we have inside our environments. Now, there's lots of different types of kind of services and offerings within inside of kind of Azure. So from compute and apps, networking, data and storage, etc., and identity access. But essentially, each of those we kind of separate into a kind of different group, and we can kind of look at those individually and work out how well or not so good we might have in terms of the security around that, etc. Okay, 1 second. Just gonna see we have a message here. Okay, cool. So as you can see here on this example, we have a policy and compliance, a resource security hygiene, and a threat protection. So each one of those has given us some indication about how well we're kind of performing. What's our rating in that area, and is there areas of recommendations that we can improve? So clearly, kind of red is not good, and we have a few kind of showing in the red category here, medium and low severity. So we kind of want to figure out how to improve that score. 461 of that at 870 isn't probably the best score in the world, obviously. So we may want to kind of, over time, improve that and also kind of find our weakest link, essentially. So we're going to use something called this overall score, secure score, I should say. It's a fairly new feature that's been brought out, but it allows us to kind of understand what subscriptions we're using. So if you're not familiar with kind of Azure terminology like subscriptions or resource groups, there's something called the Azure FUN-damentals. We're going to show you where you can kind of go and learn more about that in the Microsoft LEARN services. But essentially, we can see at each subscription, this is kind of who's paying for that kind of set of resources that you deployed. And inside of that subscription, we can have one or more resource groups. So we will kind of start at a very high tier, kind of the 5,000 kind of foot view, and say, for all the resources that belong to this subscription, how well is my security score? And I can then drill down into further details. I may also have things like regulatory compliance that I need to actually achieve within inside of my business to actually kind of be part of that industry. So we may be kind of, obviously one is GDPR, there's some around kind of the finance acts and kind of different kind of compliance algorithms, depends on where you are in the world and what kind of country you live in, who you kind of have to kind of adhere to compliance with. So we can go and look at some of those as well, and that helps with that. We're going to look at that in a little bit more detail and going to look at kind of how we improve that and look at some recommendations and how quickly we can improve that score and track that over time as well. There's a number of additional kind of Azure Security Center capabilities. Some of these are called policies and alerts. So essentially, we have the ability to notify when breaches or other security policies are kind of being not met, and we can kind of track those. We can also have security incidents detected through the policies and through the alerts that we have, and we can see kind of how often, what kind of severity there might be. So are they a low, medium, or high severity? And really kind of also then track that down to kind of where that attack's coming from. So when was it detected? What are the steps that we can do? How were they trying to attack that system? You know, is it a brute force RDP attack, for example? Now, the security admin and other people that have been given that specific security role, we're able to kind of access these kind of screens and look at these information. And there's also steps we can take to prevent that directly within inside this tool. There's so much to really show. I'm going to show a few more screens here, and then we're going to dip into it. But basically, we have a large number of ways of evaluating, understanding our security posture. You know, what is our compliance? What are our numbers? You know, what's our threats levels, etc. But also, kind of what resources do we have? You know, so we can maybe look at our virtual networks, our VMs inside that, our subnets, and other things like firewalls and other information, and really kind of start to improve that. Now, generally, this is somebody who will kind of have a security role, will kind of be controlling all of this and responsible. But security is something that everyone has a responsibility for. It's not just, oh, that's job is for Jeff over there. No, we all have a requirement to kind of think about security. And you'll see time and time in the news, literally all the time, about the breach of this kind of company, and they kind of, you know, 200 million kind of records have been kind of breached. People are constantly trying to find this information. There's lots of hackers out there, lots of people that are trying to do bad things. So kind of, you know, we don't want these bad actors getting access to our systems. And if they try to, we have enough security in place to be able to kind of thwart their activities. And they always go on to an easier target. They're not going to spend a lot of time trying to get into your system if it's heavily guarded. So we want to kind of find out what type of risk we might have and how we can improve that. So this is what we're going to be using the Security Center for again. So I'm going to go kind of, before we go into the next section, I'm going to go and show you the Security Center itself and some more information. Let's skip out of the presentation again and go over to this one here. Oops, sorry, wrong one. This one here. So Security Center. So if we go into the Microsoft Azure, we can see that we have a couple of kind of links. I can do it from the dashboard I've created, but I'm going to go down to this left-hand pane and go down to the bottom where it has like this icon called Security Center, and there's some kind of requirements there. If you click on it, hover over it, you get some quick links into free training and other useful links. But I'm just going to click into it and come into the Security Center itself. Now, you may notice at the top, it's kind of saying that we have 8 subscriptions. So I have multiple subscriptions on this specific environment. And I'm going to go and kind of look at a quick look. There's also a get started kind of a link there. So that actually kind of helps understand, and also where you can kind of upgrade, install agents, and kind of just get started with learning about the capabilities of Azure Security Center. Okay. There's some pricing and settings. We can actually see kind of what level of kind of standard tier or free tier or partial tier. So I've set these up to kind of show you that we have different pricing tiers and different costs. There's a community as well, so you learn more about some templates that might exist and the community GitHub that's there. And there's some workflow automation, which we're not going to spend time going into today, but just to make you aware, kind of there's capabilities around the workflow of creating the kind of security stuff. What I want to spend time on today is looking at our coverage. So here I can see that we have a number of subscriptions. Some of these are not fully protected, so it kind of does kind of advise. So you can see which ones are not covered. there are all covered. There's 3 partially covered, and here's the ones that are fully covered. Okay. I'm going to go actually to one that's actually partially covered, and I can see this one here. I can see the subscription. I can see as the owner, and I can also go and edit that plan and work out which tier I want to be on and whether I've got these specific kind of resources, and if there's additional pricing for that. Okay, so this is where you kind of find that level of information to set your pricing. This is where we're going to spend some of our time today, is secure score. Clearly, I don't have time to go through every single component here, but I'm going to focus on this one. I'm going to take the top one here. And this is a specific subscription then. So I remembered I said that we have multiple subscriptions. I'm seeing in this subscription what kind of resources. And I've got a lot of unhealthy stuff here. And that's not great for me. I need to kind of figure out how to improve that. Okay. So I'm going to go look, and we can see kind of in order of kind of some of the resources and also the point score. So everything has to be scored today. We're trying to kind of get that highest point score. We want to kind of secure it as much as we can. So I'm going to look at kind of some of those capabilities. So here might be an example is I've already got a couple of steps completed, but there's one that actually isn't completed, which is this step here. MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, should be enabled. So it's telling me for this control group, kind of, there's one that I need to maybe work on. If I clicked on it, I could see exactly what is the resource. I can see any remediation steps I might want to do. You see there's quite a few steps there. So we're not going to kind of go and fix those right now, but essentially it gives you all that. And it also kind of tells you how bad, what the impact might be, and more information about that. So there's a useful one there, but let's go look at ones we can actually kind of maybe fix easily enough. Okay. So if I go to secure management ports, I've got one already completed. I've got my NSG. We're going to look at those shortly. Management port should be closed on you. So I haven't got that one sorted, and I need this quick fix. You know what? I'm going to just quickly kind of click into that one. And I'm going to choose the VM that I created in the sample. And the demos, all those steps for creating these, by the way, are in this slide deck as well. I'm just going to click remediate. It's going to say, yeah, okay, so all I need to do is I need to kind of click on save. It's just doing the just in time. So there's a concept of we're only going to give you the rights to do what you need to do as and when you need them, and then we're going to kind of revoke that. So essentially, we're kind of operating with what's known as a zero trust model. So we don't trust anything. That's kind of the new kind of paradigm we're using for everything. We're going to give you rights when you need it, and then we're going to take them away when you finish using those. So if somebody comes behind you and are trying to attack that resource, they've got no kind of rights to go and kind of trying to kind of elevate to. So this one's doing its work now. Kind of wait for that to finish, and it started that configuration. So we'll come back and look at that a little bit later on. So there's others there. You can see here that we walk down through. Let me kind of look at another example. There's auditing on SQL Server should be enabled. Again, another quick fix. Let me kind of turn this on, remediate that. I'm going to say, yeah, I want 365. I'm going to remove these resources later anyway. But essentially, this is now also a very, very quick step. So you can kind of look through and see all of the very quick things you can do and be able to kind of start improving your security. But we also can categorize it into different categories of this is around the recommendations that should be for audits and logging. We want to log what's happening in our SQL servers, because if things are bad happening in there, we've got then a record of what's happening. And those security logs are going to be in a secure storage account inside of Azure that has security around it so that somebody can't go behind and try and kind of cover up their tracks, for example. So there's lots of different kind of options around kind of sorting out these capabilities. So didn't want to click on that. Apologies. So we kind of will come back and look at some of these ones we fixed earlier and see if we can get it. But one of the things I like to do is to download my CSV report. And what this does is kind of give me a current point in time, how well my score is. And also if I go and open up that score, I can see kind of this information. Now it's a CSV file, So it lends itself quite nicely maybe to being imported to something like Power BI. I can create my reports off that. I do have some of those for some of my private clients that I kind of work with, and we built specific Power BI reports to be able to kind of look at our security concepts and share that with a wider audience, because you don't want to give everyone access to your security kind of information, because again, you want to secure that, but we want to maybe have some management reporting capability. So we kind of take some of this information and highlight that and make those into reports. But we have a CSV that is a time component. You can see when we exported it. And I can maybe do this on a weekly basis and maybe kind of have those those management boards where we go to and understand what we're changing in the environment. And this is where I probably bring this information to. So this is kind of some high level stuff for the security center. Let's go back and look at some more information. So the security hygiene recommendations, this breaks us down. We can kind of see that list there. We can also jump that into specific kind of VMs or cloud services we might be running, or things like containerization. So depends on what we have available to us and what's in our environment, we can kind of go and focus it in on those resources here. And I can also go and add additional servers and onboard servers into my environment as well, and maybe install a monitoring agent and have my on-premises systems as well already kind of added to that as well. Network is probably the one that we want to kind of maybe spend some time in focusing on. I can see I have one VM. I've got a healthy VM, but there may be some additional kind of things that you want to do. And we've got internet-facing virtual machines. Should be protected with just-in-time access control. Yes, please. It's red. It means it's not fixed. I'm going to fix that now. And I'm going to my healthy resources. I can see that I kind of have that already. So we can kind of see the steps. We can see what we're trying to do. I think I'm kind of waiting for this to update because I added that remedial step earlier. Okay. Sorry, distracted sneeze there for a second. Okay, I'm going to go into the network map. We only got one kind of entry here, so kind of it's not a great deal, but you will probably have a lot more to show on here. And we have a few different ways of kind of seeing the views of this information, and we can see kind of topology and allowed traffic views as well. And we can see maybe if we're going to kind of filter into missing NSGs or dynamic denial of service offerings and that kind of stuff. So we want to kind of figure out how to kind of improve it by looking at some maybe the network map. And also we have a VNet view. Now, virtual network is kind of one of the key concepts we're going to look at next. And we're going to go and look at kind of my virtual network. This is the example that I created up for today. And we can see here that there is really nothing much to be looking at the moment, but I may have some recommendations on some of my networks that need to be fixed. Okay, so that's kind of a quick kind of view into the security center, how it's running. Let's go back to the PowerPoint slides and move into the next section. So virtual networks, we just touched on that very quickly. We're going to explore this a little bit more detailed now. So what is a virtual network? Well, it's one of the fundamental building blocks we have. It's essentially a container of kind of your resources, your VMs and other services that essentially securely can be kind of controlled about the traffic in and out of that. So we call this a virtual network. We can control access through IP addresses, through our firewalls. We will probably use something like Azure Active Directory and RBAC, which is role-based access control, to give us fine-based control of that data. Essentially, there's some best practices about how you do this. You want a few large VNets rather than lots of smaller networks. You're going to want to reserve some of that space for future use. So kind of, when you create your VNet and you've got a number of IP addresses, maybe you've got 65,000 IP addresses, you're going to create a few subnets for maybe some of the sections. We're going to show some diagrams shortly on that. And what we're going to then do is kind of maybe leave a few of those IP addresses for future assignments. Okay, and we can kind of also use something called network security groups to secure our VNets and our subnets beneath that. So kind of when we apply our policies and our kind of rules of kind of security, so this is what the network security groups is going to do. It means that we can kind of have a single or a few different groups, and we can apply that to multiple virtual networks. So a virtual network can be created with inside either the portal. We can also use PowerShell or Azure command line interface CLI to secure that. And then we can have the ability to communicate with the internet if we want public facing access into that VNet. We can communicate with other Azure resources like storage, databases, etc. And we can also communicate with on-premises resources. Each one of these, by the way, in the links here takes you to a specific kind of Azure document about more details about how to do those. We also can filter and route our traffic in and out of the VNet. And we can also what's known as network peering into other VNets. So you might have a virtual network in Europe, and you might have another virtual network in the US. They're in different regions. We might do a network peering between those. So we won't go into a lot of details about that. There are some limits about the number of resources you can do and kind of, but there's some links there to show you what those are. And we also have something called a private or service endpoint that allows us to kind of secure into specific ports and types of services, like connecting to a SQL Server database that's as a service running in Azure from a VM that we might have in that VNet. I'm going to show you an example of that. So I've already kind of created these resources because they do take a few minutes to build up, not too long, but it's maybe half an hour's worth of effort. But I'm going to go and show you those quick start kind of steps. So these are the steps that we went through. We created our virtual machine. When we did that, we also created our virtual network, and we created a resource group to go with that. So all the steps I have listed here, I've done, and I'll show you those steps and resources. We also created a SQL database server, and then I created what's known as a private endpoint. Now this allows me to, from the VM that I created, to connect the secure to that SQL database server within inside that VNet. And I kind of have a very secure connectivity to that. I'm going to be able to jump into that VM with a remote desktop. I've already done that, and I'm going to go show you that in a few seconds. And then we can access that SQL database privately from inside the VM, and there's some links there to clean up the example. So let's go and have a look at the example there. So what we do is, if I can remember where the steps are for it, I think it's here. So here's my quick start. So is it this one? That's on the other one. Okay. Okay, so this was the specific kind of example that we just created. So these are all the steps. We created the VM. So I created just a specific VM with a certain size. So this is my compute. This is kind of where I'm going to connect using some PowerShell and some a SQL Server Management Studio connection. I created my virtual network, and I gave it these information. So I gave it a resource group name, virtual network name, which region. So I went with ECUS because that's probably one of the stronger regions that we have out there in Azure. I gave it a IP address and a range of IP addresses. So this gives /16, give me 65,000 IP addresses. I've given it a subnet range, and I've kind of created a smaller subnet, and I've given it 256 addresses from that 65,000. I've created the resources. I've created my virtual machine. I've set all kind of the settings there. I've created my database server. I've created my private endpoint, and I've created the connected with my remote desktop VM. So let's go and have a look at the resources there. So what we did is I'm going to go into my resource groups and show you that I created this resource group as per the instructions. Here's the one we're looking at. I'm just going to minimize that for a second. So this is all the resources that it created. The ones that kind of obviously we're kind of interested in is probably the network security group, the network kind of interface, so this one here, and other information like the endpoint, etc. But I'm going to go and kind of jump into the VM. So the VM I've already kind of created. If I click on that, I did the connect. I've got my RDP file, which is allowing me to connect into that RDP. And I've already done that jump to kind of save time. And what I've done is I'm doing a quick kind of lookup on a specific IP address, or sorry, a specific fully qualified domain name, and getting the information about where this was deployed, etc. What I've then done is I'm also using the same URL. So let me just do the connect. And you'll see that we have the kind of fully qualified domain. So this is my SQL Server. And it's connected to the server as opposed to connecting to the SQL database as you'll see there. So I've created a SQL Server rather than a SQL database. And I've got something called my database, which I've created inside that. It has no real data in it, but I was just being able to connect to that resource. So what I'll do is I can see kind of, I've connected into that VM. I've got a public IP address of the VM. I've done an RDP into that, and I can see that everything's kind of working. Let me go and look at the security controls around that in Azure. So if I come back into my resource group, and I'm going to go to my SQL Server, notice that what we have is, obviously ability to create databases and lots of other stuff, but I have my server name, which is what I've connected to. And I'm going to show my firewall settings. I can see that I have these settings at the moment. I don't have any rules applied. I'm not allowing other services to be kind of accessed. So, sometimes you might see this set on. I'm leaving that on. I've just got everything kind of set up like this. Now, when I first set this up without the private endpoint, this wouldn't allow me to connect into this server. I created my private endpoint to connect the dots essentially for this. So this is under the firewalls and virtual networks. Here's my private endpoint that I created. And this essentially has been approved. And I could obviously go and reject that private endpoint, and I could lose my connection. There's other things around advanced data security inside of the SQL Server itself. We won't have time to go into today to do that, but essentially this is another thing around something like advanced threat protection, seeing if things are trying to be done against your servers, and we can kind of run scans and have those scans set to sent to us. But we're not going to go into details of this today. I'm going to go into the main resource group. I'm going to go into the one we looked at, and I'm going to go down to the quick start. So not where I want to be, that one I want to be here, there. I want to go into my network security group. So this is kind of where the rules of kind of who can come in on what type of protocol, so TCP, kind of others, what ports are allowed in. So I've allowed the RDP port 3389 to be able to do a remote connection into that, and all of that information. And then there's some additional security just-in-time rules that got applied that kind of then weren't there earlier until I turned on that just-in-time capability, and this got added this morning. Okay, I can go and see what my inbound security rules are, my outbound, what network interfaces I have, what the public and private IP addresses are, and what it's bound to. So in this case, a virtual machine. I'm going to go into that, and this is where maybe I can then start seeing additional information about kind of the configurations of those services, whether I've got IP forwarding. But generally, kind of these are kind of where you go and find these levels of information. Let me go to my network, my inbound security rules. So I can see kind of how I have free inbound, but no outbound. I'm not allowing traffic back out to my system at the moment. I can go and see my network security group logs if I need to see those, and lots of other cool information about these specific services. So some great kind of information. Subnets is kind of, I don't have one, but I can also maybe go and associate a new virtual network and create my subnet and associate that. If I wanted to then create a new network security group and I wanted to start binding the specific virtual networks I have and subnets, etc. Okay. So let's go back to the presentation for a second. So that was kind of a quick kind of, we create those services, we can create all the kind of capabilities. If I click on to those links, it will take me through to the various steps here. Okay. So let's go back to the presentation because we're getting close to the end of this presentation. So firewall rules and endpoints. This is essentially the list of who can come in and who. Are you on the list? You know, you go to that nightclub and someone says, are you on the list? And you then say, well, my name is Neil. And he looks on the list and goes, nope. Same thing with services and security. As they say, you need to be on the list. Now, network Azure firewalls are complete stateful firewall services with high availability, unrestricted kind of capacity. They use a static public IP address, so we can actually communicate with other public services and know kind of where that. It's fully integrated with Azure monitoring for all our login activities. We have lots of built-in functionality like traffic filtering rules, the ability to do fully qualified domain name tags, threat detection. So kind of, you know, it's kind of that gateway of kind of who's coming in and out. So we kind of use that as a kind of a major component inside of our security there. And we can log all the information as well and go and review that information, and it intersects with the security center, of course. There's another concept we need to kind of be a little bit familiar with is kind of what we call routing. So this is how do we get from where we are, say our VM, to our SQL Server, and we're going to have a route. And basically, there's some defined system routes that get built when you create these services. You can't remove or kind of delete those system routes. You can create some optional default routes. And we can also create some custom routes, and they're either user-defined or a board gateway protocol, a BGP. And we then have the ability, if we have multiples, we can kind of determine which ones we're going to use first. Microsoft has a kind of Azure priority list of user-defined routes first, then any border gateway protocols, and then system routes. So if you kind of override your system ones with user-defined routes, etc. This is where you find that information. So in a specific VM, we might go and look at that specific NIC, network interface, and we're going to then kind of see what rules we have around that. But also then you can see if I clicked on networking inside of my VM and then clicked on my network interface and went to that specific screen, we could see the effective route. So what is the route table and how does this kind of work and what's active and inactive. So there's a quick kind of visual kind of view of what will be a route table as one for the, at least, you know, example of that for one of the subnets. There's multiple subnets here. And we may have something like a DMZ zone as well. Essentially, we're coming in from the internet. We may go through something like the VPN gateway or through a load balancer or some other kind of a ingestion location. But we're coming into our virtual network. So that virtual network is that 10.00016 address there. We might have multiple. In this case, we've got a few VMs. We've got in our subnet 1, and we've got other applications, maybe like our virtual machines or SQL Server or some other resources. And we have a set of user-defined routes that have been built here. So this is kind of show you, and then you may have another virtual network, say in a different region, and we're going to do virtual network peering to communicate between those VNets. There's something also called endpoints, which are a way to extend kind of your virtual network private address spaces, and also they are specifically focused around certain types of service like storage and SQL databases and things like the service bus and key vaults and other kind of services like the Azure Data Lake Store for our services in that. So we have the ability to kind of define a service or private endpoint around these capabilities, and that really helps us kind of zone in on what's actually kind of required in terms of security without having to do lots and lots of kind of configuration around that specifically. And finally, kind of just to wrap up the session today, kind of where do you learn more about this information? So Azure LEARN is Microsoft's kind of go-to Microsoft Docs location. You can kind of go in and understand, well, what's this thing resource group Neil was talking about? What's this management group subscription? So go and learn more about kind of that. There's a website called Microsoft Docs, and we can go from there to Microsoft LEARN, and we can learn all about these different kind of, and there's a whole bunch of modules. I'm just going to show you that very quickly. And I think there's a whole bunch of other kind of resources, like Ignite Tour has recorded sessions. So I kind of put some links into where that is as well. So it tells me my time is up. So I'm just going to finish off saying that we completed the full kind of set of lessons today. It's going to show you Microsoft LEARN, but just before we go, if you have questions, we're going to answer those now. So kind of make sure you put your question in the chat window if you have them, and we'll be able to share that. If you need to get hold of me and you want to kind of communicate, you want some more questions after the session, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, and I've got my email address up there as well. And kind of let's just go and have a quick look at the Microsoft Learn. So Microsoft Learn is this site here. You can get to it from the Microsoft Docs webpage, docs.microsoft.com. Click on Start Learning, and it takes you to this. And if you want to kind of get certified, there's lots of great stuff, but we have lots and lots of modules here. You can click on kind of any of these. I'm just going to go and kind of just type security into the window here. And you see that we have lots of information about what I was talking to you today about. I have some collections in my Microsoft Edge around kind of different things about playbooks and kind of all the documentation. So you kind of want to go and learn about those. I can share that as well. So I have ability to share you at the there. So get in touch if you want kind of my list. Lots and lots of stuff we haven't talked about. And obviously, kind of you can go in and start with your Microsoft documentation. And here I've gone down and just chosen under Microsoft documentation and gone down to security, and we have a whole bunch of kind of entry points for that. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for attending. If you were live, go and enjoy the next session. If it's recording, you're watching, then kind of find another recording maybe to look at. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your sessions. Let's go check on the questions.
Neil, can I just interject? Yes, we have got a couple of questions that came through on registration. Can I just ask, how do we know if we're following security best practices in Azure?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. So yeah, so it's one of those kind of, it's quite a broad ranging kind of technology. So the Security Center is probably the best place for going into that to see that, because there is a lot of best practices around that technology. So let me just go into, if I can find it, there we go. This one. Oh, got too many screens, that's my problem. So if I go into the Security Center, which is on the left-hand side of your Azure Portal, and essentially you can start with kind of your kind of secure score. But if you go down to any of these sections, what you'll find is it starts giving you lots of kind of helpful hints about how to improve your security score. Okay. Now, if you want to go and learn about it, then Microsoft Learn is the best place to go and kind of start with that journey. If you are really trying to get kind of a good grasp against it, there is a certification called the AZ500, which is the kind of security engineer, and there's a certification around that. But the fundamentals is a good place to start, and then maybe kind of look at certification like this, which is going to be a kind of 4-day paid for certification. So I'm one of the kind of instructors out there that teaches that, and it tells you how to kind of do all these different cool things. Lots of training out there. Microsoft Learn is a good place to start though. And then use the Security Center in Azure to kind of hone in on your specific set of resources that need help.
Thank you so much, Neil. You asked my other question as well, which is which particular track. You showed a lot of learning there, but which particular track is important for DBAs and devs? So I think you answered that one too. Thank you.
Okay, anybody has any certification questions they have, just reach out to me on Twitter or email or LinkedIn, kind of any of those channels I'm available for. And I really enjoy kind of security is not one of those ones that kind of gets a lot of love, but actually it's probably one of the most important kind of things we need to get an understanding of. And there's levels of understanding, so you can kind of go and learn that very quickly. Well, I've had an absolute blast. I've loved every minute of it. Thank you for joining. Thanks for all the questions. And we've got 5 minutes before the next session, so I'll kind of I'll end my kind of contribution here, and I'll see you next time.